actually prompt deeper resonances with how love is talked about elsewhere that you may well know of yourself. And also, we're going to be speaking about differences as well as similarities. These often take us to a point where we can see more than we perhaps knew before. So it's in that spirit we want to tease out differences as well as spot similarities. For myself, it's someone who has learnt from Christianity and Platonism in particular, rather than say standing as some sort of official within the Christian tradition. And that's what I should be drawing on. But Jane, that makes sense to you, I hope.
Yes, and so I should put a proviso that, you know, I am steeped in the tradition that came out of Ibn Arabi, who was a 12th century philosopher and mystic who was born in Spain and moved into the heartlands of Islam later in his life. He was a tremendously, I justify my specialization in Ibn Arabi because he was an enormously influential figure throughout the following 700 years after his death, so, and still today actually. So talking about Ibn Arabi, you're not talking about a niche figure within Islam, but you are talking about a specific kind of a figure and somebody who was a practicing Sufi master in the way that he lived. So we're looking very much at a Sufi perspective here.
But look, to get us going, we thought that we could each take 4 terms to start scoping out what might be meant by this one word in English, love. I picked 4 Greek terms. I think Jane's got 4 Arabic terms up her sleeve. So let me just get us going with the 4 Greek familiar terms, probably: eros, philia, storge, and agape. So these are the kind of loves that don't only lead to knowledge, but they lead to virtue as well. Because when we are drawn by these loves into wider connection with reality, we take on the virtues of that wider reality in our knowing. Plus, it takes virtues to embark on this quest of love, virtues like courage and prudence, understanding, and so on. Couple more thoughts to sort of build into that basic sense, which we'll unpack in different ways, but it's also to associate love, though, with a kind of divine madness, as Plato does. If love is the longing for more than what we understand, it's to say we move out of our comprehension and may have ecstatic moments of madness or just moments of confusion. That is the gift of what's beyond us to us, felt through these kind of loves. So that's to say something about eros and philia, particularly in Plato. When you move into Christian mysticism, agape takes a major part. It's not based on desire, but it's based on what you might call abundance or amplification. It is not satisfied like a lack is satisfied. It rejoices in knowing more and more. And so it's closely associated with God and God's love in Christian mysticism.
Very much as you've been describing, actually. Within Islam, love is seen much more like a kind of force or a power than as just an emotion as such. It is very, very much, as you say, that which takes us beyond ourselves. It's seen as a power which will drive us out of our familiar patterns. You know, in cases when you come to mystical Islamic poetry, I mean, it drives people to leave their homelands, to leave their families, you know, to travel, etc. So it's this motivation to find out more. And I was very much struck by the talk that you gave last week, in which you describe love in Plato as a kind of energy. And I think that's very, very much how that would be seen within the tradition. I think also it's important to say that you know, within Islam, everything is seen as a kind of mode of divine love. Even if it appears in human love, everything is seen from really as a sort of emanating or having its root in God's love for us, or God's love for the world.
The point about moving on to the Neoplatonic tradition at this juncture is that with figures like Plotinus and his followers, a monotheistic perception of reality has emerged. It's been the person on the spiritual path following Plotinus would seek and try to follow and would know, particularly say by the presence of what's beautiful, and following, you might say, the line of beauty. The thing that is distinctive about beauty in these Platonic traditions is that the beautiful is evident to the senses as well as to the mind, whereas the good and the true, these other aspects that love might pick up, aren't seen empirically, and they're known in other ways that the mind can know. But objects in the world speak to us of beauty tangibly in front of us. And so beauty is a particularly important transcendental, to use the more modern word.
I'm going to, you know, they tend to, I mean, as I say, ishq is seen as this very passionate love, whereas hub is is seen as the divine love. And I suppose it's a slightly calmer thing, a more steady kind of a growth that you'd be talking about. Now, I think the main way that the Sufi tradition would see love, again, as I said, it is this a kind of power or a motivating force. And in particular, it's the force which takes us beyond our limits. I mean, that's very much how they would see it. So, you know, within expositions, it always begins with poetry or expositions. You would always begin by a falling in love. You know, there'd be a moment, and then this falling in love initiates a kind of a process of yearning and longing, which over time moves us out of our comfort zone and towards, you know, union of divine, or as you said in your talk about Plato, it moves us ultimately to a glimpse of, you know, moving from physical beauties, you know, the physical beauty of the world, to the beauty, to a glimpse of the absolute beauty, which we will come on to, I think, when we're going to describe. And, you know, the other great story for this is the Sufi master Jalaluddin Rumi, who was, again, an orthodox teacher at a madrasa until he encountered the wandering mystic Shamsi Tabriz, who again opened. So this would, I suppose you'd say, this is the opening of the heart. Yes, it takes you beyond intellect, and it takes you beyond the limits of your religion and your culture and ordinary notions of piety. So, but this is how this is a great theme, and there's even such a thing called sort of sacred heresy, which is for the people who are led out of the conventions into this state of ecstatic love. And then Rumi, having been this very conventional teacher, becomes the great poet of love and longing within the Persian tradition. As you probably know, the beginning, the famous, I've got it written down here for you. The famous beginning of his great Mathnui begins, you know, listen to the reed forlorn, breathing ever since it was torn from its rushy bed, a strain of impassioned love and pain. 'Tis the flame of love that fired me, 'tis the wine of love that inspired me. So it opens up this intense longing which motivates this journey. So
love within Christianity as a path, which is the role of love and suffering. There, the opening of the heart that can be painful. I mean, the one story that where this shows up in Christian mysticism is in Dante's Divine Comedy, but this process of suffering, which may go on for some time, is nonetheless within the overall path of love in this mystical tradition. You see it picked up in more modern writing as well. The thought that came to my mind when I was thinking about this was C.S. Lewis's notion of joy. And when he writes about joy, it's as much about a longing, something that you're aware of not fully comprehending, or maybe at times not comprehending at all, and yet somehow longing for, wanting, seeking. And so it's right to call it joy, because even in the darkness, it's known that it's the true object, the satisfaction, the fulfillment of the love which you have, which of course is also the love that's drawing you all along.
There's this state that's referred to within the tradition as a state of bewilderment, where you begin to lose all these distinct or precise or definite objects of desire. That's because you're moving towards attaching to the object, or a lot of the Sufi mystics would talk about love, love being an end in itself. You love for the sake of loving, not because there's necessarily an object of desire. It's a kind of state of being. I mean, Ibn Arabi, the Islamic mystical tradition drew enormously from the Neoplatonic traditions. Ibn Arabi makes this correlation always between love and knowledge. So these two always go together. So the motive is love, but the fruit is knowledge. And so the purpose, this sort of dual sense. And so when we're talking about knowledge, we're not talking actually in an academic sense, or even, but we talk more about experiential knowledge. So we would say that everything in creation is a way, is a mode by which this expression of beauty and this knowledge of what that beauty is in a sort of external projection sort of happens.
We have a fascinating discussion tonight, and we're going to leave you maybe rethinking your five senses and how real they are. Do we see an independent reality, or is what we're seeing something our brains are constructing because we need to predict, or we need to feel safe, or we need to feel less fearful, or because we've been programmed to see or hear or smell or taste or touch what we're seeing just to survive as a species? So let's get started first with our first panelist. He is a world-renowned neuroscientist. He specializes in both biology and psychology. He's the founder of the very aptly named Lab of Misfits, a perception-based creative agency. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Bo Lotto.
Well, it's great, really, really lovely to be here. It's such a wonderful group of people that are going to be here, so I feel really honored to be sitting here with them. Actually, I have a personal aim, which is I want you to know less at the end than you think you know now, all right? Because nothing interesting begins with knowing, it begins with not knowing. And it would be brilliant if you didn't know at the most fundamental level. So to start with, what is our greatest fear, right? What is our greatest fear? Think about it. And it's the dark, right? We hate not knowing, We hate uncertainty, right? We evolved to take what is unknown and make it knowable, right? It's one of the biggest sources of emotional stress is the not known, which then leads on to actually what is one of our greatest desires, right? What is one of our greatest desires? And instead of telling you, I want you to feel our greatest desire. So we're all going to stand up, right? And we're going to conduct a piece of music together. It's Strauss. You all know this piece of music, right? And we're going to conduct it together, and I want you to feel what our greatest need is. Are you ready? Yes? Yes. All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3. If you have the music. Louder. Come on, conduct. Come on. You know where it's going. Can you feel it? Right? What we need is closure. Okay? You can sit down. This is because we evolved to predict, right? All the information, I'm going to show you that all the information that falls onto your eye, into your ears, onto your skin is infinitely meaningless. It's useful, but it's not meaningful. It doesn't come with instructions, it doesn't tell you what to do. So we evolved to predict. And so in the next slide, you can see that here your brain is predicting the colors of this cube. And you see a dark brown tile at the top and a light orange tile at the side. Yes? Yeah? That is your perceptual reality. You'd bet your life that they are different when they are exactly the same, right? That's your physical reality. And now if we change the slide again, that's your perceptual reality. Nothing's changing on the screen. What's changing is the meaning of the information, not the information. Right? You're seeing the historical significance of data, not the data. What this also means is that what history gives you, right, are your assumptions and biases. Right? That's what history gives you. Because your brain is, the functional structure of your brain is a physical manifestation of your past interactions with the world. And not just your history, but the history of your family, of your culture, of your evolutionary history. Most of your life happened without you even there. Okay? And if everything you're doing is grounded in your biases that come from your history, then it means you can actually change what you see by changing your biases. So if we start this into motion, you'll see that your brain assumes that you look down onto surfaces. That's because we evolved in a ground plane. So you're seeing it spin from left to right. But now change your assumptions. Imagine you're looking up at that central plane, then stand down on it, and it will flip. Right? How many can get it to flip? Right? Sometimes it helps if you blink, blur your eyes, look around it, and suddenly it will go in the opposite direction. How many can get a flip now? Right? All you're doing is you're changing your assumptions. Okay? So, quick question actually. Which direction is it actually rotating? How many say left to right? How many say right to left? So how many say, I don't care? Right? What if I tell you there's no motion on the screen at all? Nothing's moving. Would you believe me? No? Nothing's moving. You're looking at an animation. An animation is a series of still images that are slightly different from each other. Right? Your brain is taking that small change and seeing the meaning of the change, not the change. If you take those exact same images and put them in random order, you see a flickering. Right? So you're taking a series of still images, perceiving them to move, and then flipping it from one direction to the other depending on how you think about it. In this sound sequence, I'm going to tell you that nothing's going to change. But you decide what you want to hear. You decide if you want to hear brainstorm or green needle. Okay? It's up to you. And flip it back and forth. Let's turn it up. How many hear brainstorm? How many hear green needle? How many can flip it? You're deciding what to hear, right? These perceptions and these biases don't just stay inside your head, right? You project them out into the world. So here we have two triangles and a circle, completely meaningless shapes until we put them into motion. all right? And you're going to project a meaning onto them. You hate one of the triangles, right? You're feeling bad for the other one. You're worried for the circle, right? This is a horror film. You can hear the soundtrack. And we're going to stop it there. And you're all wondering what happens to the circle. And the answer is nothing. It's a circle, right? And what we do for objects, we also do for other people. Because where we can measure their what and their where, we can never measure their why, right? So you project a meaning onto them based on your biases, your assumptions. And this will come in, we'll talk a lot about tonight. So what then is the fundamental challenge of the brain? It's this. And again, instead of telling you what I want to show you, I want you to hold up your finger to me, ideally this one, okay? And line it up to me and put it towards you or away from you until me and your finger are the same size. Right? Do you have that? Okay, we're not the same size. Okay? But your brain has no physical access to the world other than through the data that it's getting onto its receptors. And at that point, your eyes and your brain would tell you that me and your finger are the same size. Right? Because light, sound, etc. conflate multiple aspects of the world, in this case, size and distance. So the thing that is loud and far away can generate the exact same stimulus as something that's quiet and up close. And this is the fundamental challenge of every brain, which is to solve the problem of uncertainty. Okay? So with that said, I think we're finished with the introduction. Right? And again, I hope you will know less at the end of all of our conversations than you know now, but understand more. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Panel for all of us tonight. So let's get right to meeting the rest of our panelists. Our next participant studies the brain and the mind, professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience at the University of Sussex in England. He has published more than 100 papers exploring consciousness, perception, and the self. Please welcome Anil Seth. Do past risks and rewards determine how we act in the present? Our next participant studies how we compare experience to evidence. She holds a PhD from Columbia. She did her postdoc fellowship at Princeton University, and today she runs her own lab at NYU. Please welcome Christine Constantinople. All right, we're going to ask all of you, can you make the case against reality? Well, that's the title of the forthcoming book from our next participant, who argues that we have evolved thanks to our ability to hide the truth from our own perceptions. He's a professor of cognitive sciences at UC Irvine. Please welcome Donald Hoffman. And finally, feelings of hunger, feelings of fear, feelings of safety, even love can all apparently, according to our next participant, be aroused by our sense of smell. But how? Our next participant is professor of biochemistry, molecular biophysics, and neuroscience at Columbia University. Please welcome Stavros Lombardos. All right.
But really, perception is not coming from the outside in, it's coming from the inside out, always and all the time. It's this kind of neuronal fantasy that is tied in some way to whatever is out there. And it's the process of understanding how that relationship works. That's perception, and perception is not about representing the world as it is.
So you believe that there is an independent reality, but it is influenced by what you yourself are processing with your own senses and your own experience?
Yeah, I think there probably is something. If I jump in front of a bus, it's not going to go well, regardless of whether I'm looking at it or not, or what it looks like. It's there. And, but the way we experience things from colors to shapes to maybe even the structure of space and time, the way in which our perceptions are formed, those, however real they seem, aren't a kind of just an opening out of the brain to the world. We impose this structure on, sensory data doesn't have color. It's electromagnetic radiation is color. All our sensory inputs are colorless, shapeless, smellless, odorless. We construct not only the specific contents of what we perceive, but the modalities themselves, the structure, the whole shape and organization of our perception comes more from within than from without.
Donald, you're nodding.
Yes, I think that evolution shaped us not to see reality as it is. We tend to think that our perceptions, our visual system is like a camera. It just takes a picture of the truth, and we're just seeing the truth as it is. The wonderful demonstrations are a clear example of a very general principle, as Anil was saying, that we're constructing what we see, but there's this other twist. We usually, among cognitive neuroscientists, it's pretty well received that we're constructing what we see, but the assumption is that evolution has shaped us so that our constructions match the truth. And I'm going to argue against that evolution shaped us with a user interface that hides the truth. Nothing that we see is the truth. The very language of space and time and objects is the wrong language to describe reality, and that's very useful to not see the truth. You can control reality if you don't know what reality is very, very usefully. And so it's that kind of, so that's a very strong position on this. So we don't see reality as it is, and that's why we're here. That's what keeps us alive.
We don't see reality as it is, but then how do you account for the fact that so many of us see the same reality? Sometimes. I mean, clearly there are many, many occasions when we differ in our own perceptions.
Great. One example that Bo Lotto gave us quite a few examples. So when we all saw those two squares as orange and brown, we were not seeing reality as it is, and we all agreed. The reason we agree is not because we all see the truth, is because we all have the same interface shaped by natural selection. We agree, we have consensus because we're members of the same species, and we all have the same user interface. It's like all Apple users have the same desktop, so the things are very, very similar, but if you have a PC, then it's a very different kind of desktop. So we agree not because we see the truth, but because we have the same interface.
And Christine, you've found in your research that basically as a species, as Donald just referred us to, we're all, and not just us, other species as well, sort of desperate to see patterns, desperate to be able to predict, because as Bo said in his opening, there's nothing we fear more than the unpredictable, than chaos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So in the lab we're interested in kind of the neural basis of decision biases. So if you present people with the same option repeatedly, they won't always answer the same way. And there's multiple reasons for that. First of all, our brains and our sensory organs are imperfect, so there's some noise that's associated with the processing of those options. But there's also decision biases that, depending on what we previously have experienced or choices that we've previously made, they'll shape our future decisions. And we actually study these things in rats because we have a very sophisticated experimental tool set that allows us to interrogate the neural basis of these biases with cellular resolution. And just to give an example, we conducted a study where we presented rats with different gambles or safe amounts of reward. So these were thirsty rats, so they were working for water rewards. And what we found is that if the rats gambled and they won, they were more likely to gamble again. And humans do this. So this is in economics referred to as the hot hand fallacy. So, in finance or recreational gambling, if you gamble and win, then you think you have a hot hand and you'll gamble again. So then we were able to leverage the tools that we have in rodents. Specifically, we used viral and genetic techniques to express ion channels in a particular part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex, which is behind the eye. And when we shine a laser, we were basically able to turn off or on cells in that brain area with millisecond precision. And if we inactivated the orbitofrontal cortex, we found that we eliminated the hot hand bias in our rats. And so we were able to, again, kind of leverage the tools that we have in rats to identify a brain circuit that's causal to kind of this really bad bias, right? Where the rats think that they're more likely to win, but they're not.
All right, Stavros, I'd like you to weigh in on all of this.
I study olfaction, which transform chemical structures into illusions of smells. So by default, these scents create an illusion of reality because chemical structures do not have a smell. That's our brain transform this structure into something that we think has a smell. And that's very helpful because we can navigate into our environment, and animals use it to avoid predators, to find food, but it's not an accurate representation of these chemical structures.
So, but we all, for example, recognize the smell of smoke and assign that to danger, right?
So there are some evolutionary selected smells that have common meaning to a lot of us, and this is also very common in animals. Mice are very scared of fox urine without ever smelling it. But the majority of smells do not have the same meaning to all of us. Actually, we have a lot of genetic polymorphisms that makes us understand the smell of things very differently with each other.
In the medieval world, there were two things, body and soul. The soul was the knot of the universe because it integrated belief in God, cosmology, life on earth, psychology, the difference between life and death, all of those things. That started to crack with the scientific revolution. The world started to change.
Historian and psychiatrist George Macari's new book is called Soul Machine, The Invention of the Modern Mind.
The third entity, the mind, started to emerge as a natural alternative for the place for inner life.
In the 1500s, notions of a secular mind were already lurking. Johann Weyer of Holland dared to suggest to the Church Fathers that not all witches should be burned at the stake, because some of them might not have made covenant with the devil, but just be suffering from a disease that crippled their reasoning. In the 1600s, Oxford medical doctor Thomas Willis began dissecting and mapping the brain, launching modern neuroscience in the West. And his most famous student, philosopher John Locke, developed a science-based theory of mind and of self that said they were based partly on imperfect subjective impressions.
The mind was highly scandalous, very dangerous as an idea, and was one that very much had a lot of political and scientific, medical, and theological implications that made it quite explosive. Why? It challenged absolutism, both in terms of political power and in terms of clerical power. The mind was fallible. It could not make absolute claims about truth. It demanded, therefore, tolerance, because if I can't know the absolute truth, I should tolerate you and you should tolerate me. It allowed for secular ethics like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The idea of a center of reason and will that was not immortal caught on, and, says Macari, helped change the way the West was run.
It's the centerpiece of the emergence of secular culture.
But there was a problem. Could you locate this new sort of mind in the brain?
Well, the brain is easy to define. I mean, you can make the cut where you want, but the brain is an empirical object. The problem is interior experience, and mind is not like any other object in the natural world because it's not available to the external observer and always available to us.
Today, we have technologies that can amaze us with new discoveries of how some parts of the brain work and are connected.
What we don't have yet, I would argue, is a way of bridging mental experience with the brain in a coherent model that allows for mental intention. And so I would say we still are a ways off from solving the mind-brain problem.
Evolving concepts of mind and self, spurred by scientific explorations, have helped to change how societies are governed, basing our hopes more on the real world. The exciting question now is whether our dazzling new technology can help us understand what we're really talking about when we speak of the mind, the self, and even perhaps the soul.